Hey man,
How you doing today?
I'm good.
All
Good.
right, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I'm just looking at your hat collection.
Thanks. Much like you, I wear many hats. Um, Before we start every podcast, we got to butter your bread and do something we call the over-the-top intro. Can we do that for you, Ariel?
Sure.
Let's get into it. My next guest got a Super 8 camera on his 12th birthday, and from then his life have never been the same. Since then, he has become an award-winning director, producer, writer, DJ, and he's known for such works as The Iceman, Angel, Criminal, AM Love Mix 2021, still on Spotify, people, and SoundCloud. And what we're here to talk about today, 1992, in theaters, August 30th. Ariel Vromen, welcome to the podcast.
That was a great intro. Thank you.
Man, I am super excited and super to talk with you, not just because of your body of work. I did get a chance to see 1992. And as a person who was alive in 1992, you got a lot of stuff right. And, and with that, I'm very curious. How did this idea come about?
Well, the idea came from writer Sasha Penn, and I think he lived during the riots also here in LA. I mean, he wanted to do a movie obviously about that day, but he thought that you should approach a more entertaining concept, and instead of just preaching and just do another melodramatic historic movie, which could be great also, but he thought that there is a way to metaphor these things into a non-fictional, because we are already at that time when he developed the script, um, was in a stage of a post-trauma rather than being traumatic. Needless to say, I read the script just after the George Floyd, nationwide riots, from Minnesota onwards. So LA was still kind of, in a mess. You know what I mean? I imagine I'm reading a script that happens almost 30 years earlier, and I feel that I just relived it, or I just felt that, there's some kind of a loop that we hit again. So I got involved by basically reading the concept, and then, obviously, coming on board, rewrites, do all the stuff that the director producer, wants to bring a fast movie into production, and, going through the whole casting, financing, and then, made the movie happen.
Man, that sounds great. And to be attached to something like this, I'm trying to word my questions without spoiling the movie. So to be attached to something like this on a more fictional level, because this movie has a lot to do with fatherhood. I can say that. And as a father myself, it does show two very different dynamics of father-son relationships and how they both change over the course of the film goes. Why was that so important to show those parallels on both sides of the fence?
Like when you're dealing with a story like the Rodney King, they gotta be, it's a story of two. It's not a story of one. It's a story of two cultures, of two colors, of two energies that clashing into, ideology of pain, of whatever they going through. So for me to see those two dialect, I mean, man, that one of them was Mercy King, that back in the day, he was an OG, and he's definitely carried some sort of, I would say, on the level of a sociopath within him, because he was a killer. I mean, he was a full-on gangster that had his own beliefs, his own things, his own rules. He was not somebody that, you want to basically sing in the middle of the street and say the wrong thing to him. Now, he went into a 16 years correction where he find we didn't really lay into it, but you see, there's a little suggestive. He found God. He found his own, his own voice. He's found his own responsibility, and he wanted to start a new page in his life. And then on the other hand, you have a father like Ray Liotta, who is a full-on sociopath that didn't go through any correction mode, that had to raise kids, that drone them into what he's doing, whether it's dangerous or not, whether the kid isn't fitting into this world or not, but force them kind of like being a part of that, risking their kids. And then eventually you have like kind of like almost like two ingredients of humans that are in a way metaphoric of the clash. And then now you clash them into one. And then you see, they're developing over one night of two different families. That's again a matter of choices: either lose everything or gain everything.
And I'm glad you brought that up because this was a great story, but arguably a better cast because you got some heavyweights here, man. Did you have these people in mind when you guys were writing this out?
Um, Tyrese came to mind when I started to look for something because, it's when you're making a film, you need to have, they always ask you like, okay, who's your star? Who's the name? And then, so, I needed to find a guy in the right age and that's kind of like bringing some sort of like a history. But now I will be able to put him in a place where it's out of his comfort zone and to kind of like make him vulnerable. So that's kind of like a Mercer King, a guy that the street knew he was, and now he's gone, and now he's trying to reinvent himself into something that into blend into a new reality, which is I thought
Right.
that this will be very very strong for that. And then I had very little time to present who is the other father, so Ray Liotta comes in, and Ray Liotta wanted to play down and dirty for this movie, and he's on screen, and immediately oh my God, I don't know what's gonna happen next. No idea what this guy is gonna do. His decision making is irrational, and I'm afraid. And then same goes for Scott, same goes for Dylan and Christopher and Michael Beasley, like all those other guys that I casted. I had them to bring a certain energy that will represent the characters because there was a lot of characters in the film and very little time. So how do you kind of like handing to the audience into that comfort zone of like, hey, that's going to be, those are the ingredients that you're about to taste. So don't question where this tomato was from.
Right, right. That makes sense. That makes sense. One of the things, this movie, a little over 90 minutes, and there's such an onion to both sets of fathers, like Ray Liotta's character and Tyrese's character. I'm very curious, what was left on the cutting room floor? What was something you wish you could have elaborated a little bit more about that you just plain didn't have time for?
Oh, that's always a painful question. Because in the cutting room, sometimes there are scenes that you often tend to see that the cutting room floor is always filled up with stuff from your first act and from your exposition. Because in an exposition parts, this is really it's really the hardest part. It's like how do you doing such a fast forward the first acts and first acts, in 100 years of cinema are very complicated because we've seen it all. I mean, we've seen so much. So like, how do you economize that? So sometimes you overwrite on script and you overshoot it. So there's a scene that we had to take out because it was just too long. That kind of like introducing us, Scott Eastwood and Dean and Arnold, Regan and Dennis, like first interaction. But again, the story of Tyrese felt more valuable and more important to hang. So it was like, okay, we're not going to distract with that exposition, for instance. Um, Other stuff, there was not a lot. There was one scene that was just like too hard to watch. And again, it's when they literally cutting Clay's leg, and it was literally physicality of like they had like this sore and they had no choice and they had like literally to move the to keep that they had to cut his leg.
Yep.
And so imagine filming that. So suddenly when you're watching the movie, and the movie somehow is actually loved by women. I mean, a lot of girls that watched it liked it because the level of violence is in such a contained level. It feels way more violence than it is, by the way. You know what I mean? You feel that
Oh
there is,
yeah.
but it's really like there's a lot of quiet moment. There's a lot of depth. So like when that scene with Scott Eastwood cutting Clay's leg, it was like, oh my God. I mean, like you should see the reaction of girls that watched that film. It's like, oh my God, no, get it out of here. I'm done. You literally like, oh, but this is just a moment because otherwise how am I going to explain that he's sitting now at the end of the day? So, one of the things anyway, you're going to see it probably in the deleted scene. We're going to bring that in.
No problem. But this has been great, Ariel. I wish I had more time. I know we only had a little bit, but you're welcome back to the podcast whenever you want.
Thank
And I
you.
just thank you so much for just giving us a little bit of your time, man.
All right, Abshir, thanks for the love and spread the word.
All right, I will. Have a great one.
Bye bye.